What do you do when your spiritual mentor fails you? Maybe you've been in that situation at some point where somebody you really looked up to fell. Maybe they got into sin or even just totally walked away from Christianity. And this is somebody that you really looked up to, either as a person that you knew personally or a great so called spiritual leader, maybe a television personality or a musician or something like that. And they left the faith or they got into sin. What do you do? With that, there is a phenomenon that's going on in the world today, and it's called deconstruction. Deconstruction is when people take everything that they believe and basically deconstruct it, and they start to say, "Well, I don't know if I believe this anymore. I don't know if that's really true anymore." And often it comes at from the LGBTQ agenda. People start saying, "Well, maybe that's okay," and then they start to deconstruct all their beliefs about the Bible. But sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it's just a very popular person who is a spiritual leader, a mentor to many people, and they just fall and they get into sin or walk away from the faith. What do we do about that? How do we respond to that? I want this video to help you because I think we find something in the book of Hebrews that will really help us out with this. There have been people that I have known personally that have fallen or walked away, and some, big names. I think of names like RaviZacharias. After he died, a lot of stuff came out, and I, way back somewhere in my video archives here, I have a video on him. It kind of deals with the same topic here today. Somebody like TonyEvans, or more recently, one of the big names is SteveLawson, and there's musicians and people like that that have just walked away or have fallen. And when this happens, sometimes we might have a question. And the question is, if that person fell or they walked away from the faith, they're no longer doing ministry, maybe they just outright reject it all, does that mean that everything that person taught is untrustworthy? Does that mean it's not true? And I think this is where we have to be really careful, because sometimes we take what we believe and we wrap it up in a person. We just want to latch onto a person, and man, whatever they say, I'm just going to buy it without actually thinking through things. So we should ask ourselves this question: do I just believe the things that I believe because somebody else believes it, or are these really truly my beliefs? You can even do that with your parents. I always believe this because my parents believed it. Now, is this really true? Or a friend or a great evangelist or something like that. Do we really believe it because we believe that it's true, or is it just because somebody else believes it? Well, believe it or not, the answer is in Hebrews chapter 3, part of the answer anyway. The whole study of the book of Hebrews, and I'm kind of going through a little bit here in this channel, not to get into great detail, we're doing that in church, but to find things that will help us out. And when we get into Hebrews chapter 3, we have this connection between Moses and Jesus. And the whole point of the author of Hebrews, in the book of Hebrews, is that you should not be going back to the law. These people are going back to the law. And part of it was, okay, Moses was a great guy. God gave the law to Moses to give to the people. And so he was a great guy, but he's not as good as Jesus, okay? The law that came through Moses is not as good as the gospel that comes through Jesus. So don't focus on Moses, but focus on Jesus, which, by the way, is a good lesson for us today, because we can get focused on our own modern day Moseses, which may be a musician or a TV preacher or a preacher that we know, or just a friend or a parent, a child, whatever. And the point here is, don't focus on that person. Don't believe what you believe because of that person. Believe what you believe because it's true, and truth is ultimately found, of course, in Jesus. So I just want to read a little bit here from Hebrews chapter 3 and make some applications to this, if I can get our Bible up here. Okay, it says, "Therefore, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our confession, Christ Jesus, who was faithful to him who appointed him, as Moses also was faithful in all his house." So he's saying, consider Jesus. We're supposed to be following Jesus, who was faithful just like Moses was. Now, Moses meant a lot to them. For us, Moses is often what we read about him in the Bible. We understand that there's a lot of history of what we believe goes back to him. But for the Jews, to whom the book of Hebrews was primarily written, Jewish believing Christians, Moses was a massive hero to them. So it meant a lot to them. He says, look, Jesus was faithful. Understand, you're supposed to be following Jesus. He was faithful just like Moses was. And I'm using Moses as an example because you all know Moses. You trust him. In fact, you're wanting to go now back to the law that Moses gave. So I just want you to understand how important Jesus is. That's what he's telling them. He says that Moses was faithful as a servant. But this one, let's look in verse 3. For this one, Jesus, has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, inasmuch as he who has built a house has more honor than the house. For every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God. And Moses was indeed faithful in all his house as a servant for a testimony of those things which should be spoken of afterwards, but Christ as a son over his own house. So his point here is, yes, Moses was faithful. Moses is a great guy, but he was not as good as Jesus. In fact, when I preached this in our church, that was the title. He's a great guy, but not as good as Jesus, or something like that. Right? Because Moses was a great guy. He was a great example for these people, but not as good as Jesus. You need to follow Jesus. So the Hebrews, they were saying, we like Moses. We like the law he gave. We want to go with that. And the author of Hebrews is saying, no, you need to stay with Jesus, which you can begin to see our connection here with our society today, or with our situation of people deconstructing and walking away from their faith. We're not supposed to be following these men. We're supposed to be following Jesus. He says Jesus is better. So his point is, don't exaggerate the importance of a man. We can do that so much. Now, we should honor people who have served faithfully and who study and learn and try to teach us, to set an example. We should honor them and elevate them to a degree. You know, the Bible even talks about deacons who serve well. They're worthy of great honor, right? And for pastors, the same thing, and leaders that spend time and try to really teach you and set an example. We ought to elevate people like this in the right way, honor them, you know, and listen to them and learn from them. But if they walk away from it all, if they fall, we need to realize it's not about that person. The whole thing that the author of Hebrews is telling them is that the focus wasn't supposed to be on Moses and the law. God gave the law through Moses, and that was a wonderful thing. But don't get all hung up, oh, this is Moses. This is our great leader. We need to go follow his law that he gave. No, the point is Jesus was the fulfillment of the law, so follow Jesus. It's always been an issue where people are, they just love to focus on personalities. I guess we're just built that way. Someone becomes famous, or they're a celebrity. Even in the Christian world, they're celebrities. And we think, wow, I just want to follow them. And sometimes they're very good at what they do. People become famous because they're good at what they do. Sometimes famous preachers, even, they're very eloquent and people like to listen to them. And sometimes I think it's groupthink. Everybody just happens to like this person, so I guess I need to get on board too. But musicians are that way. Some are just very good. We've gone to some concerts, you know, and sometimes there's the opener, right? The opener comes in and they're pretty good. Obviously, you know, they're good or they wouldn't be in that. But what a difference between the opener and the headliner. I mean, the quality is just so much different. Why? Number one, they become more popular, so they get more money, so they can hire more people and get more stuff, you know, more technology and everything like that, better background musicians or whatever. So there are some that are really good, but how do people become popular? They become popular, like I said, by groupthink often. People say, oh, you like that musician, you like that preacher, you like whoever. And so I like them too. There's one, I'm not going to mention his name. I think he passed away, actually, that everybody just loves to talk about. Oh, I listened to him this morning and that. And I thought, well, I'm just going to listen to this guy once. And I listened to a little bit and I thought, what this guy is a boring speaker. I mean, it's not like most churches have, you know, if they're preaching the right stuff, many of the pastors have much more personality than this person, and you learn more. I don't understand. It's just groupthink. You get the TV show, and suddenly everybody thinks that you're really good. But it happens with YouTube channels. I mean, you look at some of these YouTube channels that are extremely popular, and you think, how did they get popular? Well, people talk about, hey, have you watched so-and-so? You know, boy, you got to be a subscriber to this person. And people buy into this. The dumbest things can really become great on YouTube because of groupthink. People aren't thinking for themselves. They're just buying into what everybody's saying. The same thing can happen with churches and pastors. You know, I go to this church because, well, it's the popular thing to do. Or I like this great speaker because that's the popular thing to do. And sometimes people will, kind of a side note, people will come to me, especially on Sunday morning. It really kind of drives me crazy. Hey, did you hear what so-and-so said on TV this morning? You know, some popular preacher. And I'm thinking, I don't care. What do I care what he said? I'm focused on what I'm talking about here today. I mean, if that's the person, if that's, maybe this shouldn't be this way, but if that's the person you want to listen to, go to their church, see if they visit you in the hospital. They're probably not going to, right? But we get all hung up on these big names and these people, but then sometimes they walk away from the faith or they get into sin. What do we do with that? Okay. We have to make sure we're not following the doctrine of a person. We're following doctrine that is correct. There's a danger when we idolize a person and they fall, it might affect our faith. So we can't idolize a person. We should learn from them, but we shouldn't idolize them where it would cause us to question our own faith if that person walked away. And I think of Moses. This is the illustration here. Moses, at the end, he did so many great things. But remember at the end where God told him, speak to this rock, and he hit it with his rod. This is the second time this happened. And first time he's supposed to hit it, second time speak to it. And he was so mad that he hit it. And God said, what? You can't go into the promised land because you have failed me. And so here, even Moses fell. Even Moses turned away from God, at least for a little while. This wasn't a permanent thing for him. But everybody can fall. Everybody has a possibility of doing things that are wrong. We can't allow ourselves to be, to have our faith being questioned because somebody that we learn from is wrong. We should take what they say, think about it, and listen and learn. I have many people that I like to listen to on YouTube. When I'm working out or something, I'll watch videos. Sometimes it's preaching, sometimes it's about politics, sometimes it's about something I'm studying, whatever it is, abortion or artificial intelligence or, whatever. They're just whatever I happen to be interested in that day that I'm trying to learn something about, I'll watch these and I learn from them. But I have to remember that what these people say, if they're Christians, I want to evaluate it based on the truth of what they're saying, not just on the fact that, wow, he says that, I'm just going to believe it. No, I want to check it out because, I hear there's some I like to listen to that I think they're great in some areas, but there's some areas about their theology I don't agree with. Like some are great in philosophy and apologetics, but I don't agree with some theological things. And sometimes it's the other way around. They're great in theology, but I'm not so sure about their apologetics. So we just have to take what we hear and listen and say, okay, is that true? I'm not going to buy it just because that person says it, but because I think it's true. So you can have pastors, teachers, friends, parents, organizations, whatever it is that can teach you, that can help you, but don't just believe it just because they say. And that goes for Sunday school curriculum even. We get this curriculum and it comes in and people teach it. Oh, it must be true. Well, you don't know. Okay. I don't like to use curriculum myself because it takes me more time trying to figure out what that writer meant. I'd rather write it myself. It's just the way I work. But if you like devotionals, if you like Bible study books, if you like curriculum, things like that, always check it out first. That should be a whole lesson by itself. Fact check. There's fake news, right? Even in the theological world. We have to make sure we know what we believe and have to make sure we know why we believe, which really is the purpose of my channel here, is to help us understand what we believe and why we believe it. So what happens if your spiritual mentor falls or walks away from the truth? It shouldn't affect what you believe because what you believe should be based on the truth, not on what somebody did. So honor people, respect them, learn from them. But my encouragement would be don't let your faith be all wrapped up in a person or an organization. Make sure you're understanding the truth. All right. Well, I hope that helps. And I will see you next time. God bless.